I didn't envision my life turning out this way. For the past 18 years, I've been unhappy, and it seems like there's no relief in sight. I'm not even sure how it happened. One moment I was a carefree bachelor, and before I knew it, I was married and no longer as content as I once was. I wouldn't call Sherry a beauty queen, but she was friendly and approachable. For a guy like me, that was really important. Her friendliness and openness made it easy to ask her out, and I didn't feel like I'd be rejected. This led to a steady relationship, and a year later, when I got a permanent job at the pump factory, we got married. Now, 18 years later, I'm still working at the pump factory and still married. The biggest difference is that we now have 2 children. I've always been a laid-back person. I never aspired to be a boss or an entrepreneur. I believed in the philosophy of go along to get along, whatever that means. Don't make waves, don't upset anyone. Most of the time, I was pretty good at it. What do I mean by most of the time? Well, when it comes to my marriage, I haven't been so successful. Sherry quickly realized she could take advantage of my easygoing nature to get what she wanted. As a wife, I didn't have many complaints about Sherry. She cooked well, kept the house clean, was generally affectionate, especially in the early years, and maintained herself nicely. On the other hand, she started to take charge as soon as she realized she could get away with it, and she wasn't very thrifty. I always wanted to buy us a house, but every time I managed to save a few dollars, Sherry would find something to spend it on. As a result, we're still living in a rented house, and our credit cards are always maxed out. Our family life wasn't always smooth. Our son Dwight was 16 and had been arrested twice for drug dealing. One more time, and he wouldn't have been granted probation. Our 17-year-old daughter, Gemma, was a full-fledged goth. Her lifestyle was something I couldn't understand, and her mother fully supported her. Family dinners were non-existent. I rarely saw or interacted with my children. My wife made it clear that I should mind my own business and that she would take care of the kids. As you might guess, my relationship with my wife wasn't any better. A few years ago, she took a job at one of the local insurance agencies. I'm not sure what her job entailed, but she liked it, so I kept my mouth shut. She said it was her money, and she could spend it however she wanted. This meant the money didn't go toward food, rent, utilities, or other household expenses. Instead, it was spent on clothes and salon visits. Over the years, her salary increased regularly, as did her wardrobe. During all this time, I enjoyed my work at the factory. I advanced in my career and eventually became a head assembler. We didn't produce mass-market pumps, but rather specialized pumps for specific purposes. My job was to ensure that all the necessary components were available for each project. It might not have been an impressive career goal, but I was happy and content. The pay was good, and the family received healthcare benefits. About 5 years ago, I began to suspect that my wife was having an affair. It didn't take long to confirm this because she didn't see the need to hide it. I accepted all the usual flimsy excuses for her outings and never questioned her. Why bother? Our intimate life gradually declined until it completely disappeared. She didn't complain. I eventually figured out why she was getting such a generous salary increase. It turned out she was having an affair with her boss, Malcolm Hurd. I started putting aside a little money on the side. Additionally, I picked up a new hobby, wood carving. I didn't know much about wood carving, but I had a pocket knife. I quickly realized that serious wood carvers usually don't use pocket knives, even though movies and TV shows often depict them doing so. After a while, I acquired a few good carving knives and some other tools. I began carving small animal figures and then moved on to more complex pieces. I found that spending time alone in the basement brought me relaxation and enjoyment. I realized I was more of a whittler than a carver. I'm not sure what the difference is, but the term whittler felt more fitting. Then I discovered poplar bark. My carving hobby took on new meaning. The only problem seemed to be finding good quality bark. Eventually, I found a source of poplar bark in Montana. Most carvings from poplar bark seem to fall into the categories of whimsical houses or tree spirits. I decided to focus on learning how to create the houses. As my passion for bark carving grew, my relationships with my family gradually faded away. My future looked bleak, and I had neither the motivation nor the desire to change it. I resigned myself to the idea that I would die as a lonely old man, sitting in my basement, whittling away. By then, I didn't really care anymore. And then I got a phone call. Hello. Curtis? Curtis Langford? Yes. This is Marcia Hurd. Your wife works with my husband at Eagle Home Insurance. I believe we met a few years ago at one of the company gatherings. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hurd. I don't recall meeting you. I haven't attended many company events. I'm usually not invited. Well, in any case, the company is holding an awards ceremony this Friday, and you should plan on attending. I think you'll find it interesting. Nothing too formal, just a suit and tie will do. I don't think so, Mrs. Hurd. My wife usually isn't too keen on me going to these kinds of events with her. I think she's worried I might embarrass her or something. I don't think I'll be able to make it, but thank you for the invitation. This is more than just an invitation, Mr. Langford. I really think it would be in your best interest to attend. I've already reserved seats for you and your wife. They serve top-quality ribs here. We'll see, but don't count on it. I'm sure you'll make it, Mr. Langford. See you on Friday. It was a strange conversation with someone I had never met. I had neither the interest nor the desire to attend such events. How would Sherry react when she got home? I wondered whether I should even tell her about Mrs. Hurd's call. Maybe I should buy a new tie? I decided to go online and order a new batch of wood bark. I had a lot of carving work to do. It was almost 8 o'clock when my wife finally came home. As usual, I had already eaten. Sorry for being late, dear. We're dealing with a lot of claims due to the storm last month. Did you make something for dinner? Yes. Did you eat already? We ordered pizza to the office. I got an interesting phone call today from Mrs. Hurd. There's a company event on Friday night, and she insists that we both attend. I told her that you'd probably be there, but not me. She insisted that we both need to go. I have no idea why, and I didn't want to argue with her. Let's see if you can sort this out by the end of the week. Why would Mrs. Hurd call you? I have no idea. I have absolutely no interest in attending any of your company's social events. You know that. Just take care of it. It must be important if she took the time to call you. Maybe you should just change jobs. That might be easier than upsetting her. You do know that she's the real owner of the company, not Malcolm, right? No, I didn't know that, and I really don't care. Why are you so adamant about this? Why? Do you really want to know? I feel awkward and humiliated being around all your colleagues because they know what our relationship is like. I don't understand why you won't do whatever it takes to make me leave. Apparently, it doesn't bother you. What on earth are you talking about? Everything you're saying is complete nonsense. Everyone at your company knows about your relationship with Malcolm Hurd. Every time they see me, they smirk, giggle, or make snide remarks. I can deal with it by avoiding them. That's why I just stay out of their way. Curtis, you're not thinking clearly. I don't know where you're getting these strange ideas. You're going on Friday. That's final. Buy a new tie. No. Forget it. I'll buy you a new tie. Interestingly, she didn't deny or defend her relationship with Malcolm Hurd. She simply let it slide. If you don't discuss it, it doesn't exist. This was the first time I had ever said anything or implied anything about her affair. There was no reaction from her. For years, I had tried not to rock the boat, and when I finally did, it didn't seem to matter. It was as if she didn't care whether I knew or not. I decided I needed an exit strategy. I wasn't going to endure this any longer. I would just move on. I had 4 days to prepare. What was I preparing for? I didn't know. For 18 years, I had been the good guy. I had wasted half my life. By the time Friday came, I was ready. All the options had been considered, and one had been chosen. The hardest part was deciding what to do about the kids. I assumed they were both mine, but I didn't have a real parental relationship with either of them. I had tried, but I had failed. Sherry had managed to push them away from me, and I let it happen. As a result, they were no longer my responsibility. All I could do was provide for them financially. Sherry took a few minutes to make sure my tie was properly tied, and I swear I saw her smirking as she did it. On the way there, I was reminded not to cause a scene or do anything that might embarrass her. It was going to be a long night. That night never happened. There were only about 50 or 60 people there, and I didn't know any of them. Sherry quickly moved away from me, so I headed to the open bar and grabbed a bottle of whatever beer they had. I hadn't even finished my first one when I noticed a few younger guys glancing in my direction and smiling. As I turned away, I caught the word cuck and heard some chuckles. "Hi, I'm Gary Jones. You're Curtis, right? Sherry's husband?" He extended his hand. I shook his hand and just nodded, silently confirming my identity. We stood there for a few seconds, neither of us quite sure how to start a conversation. "So, Curtis, how long have you and Sherry had an open marriage?" I've heard about arrangements like that, but I've never met anyone who actually lives that way. He smiled and waited for some kind of response. He wasn't being smug. To him, it was a genuine question. I noticed a small group of women nearby looking in my direction and giggling. If I stayed here, it was going to be a long night. I hadn't even been there 10 minutes. I set my half-empty bottle on the counter, turned to my companion, and shook his hand again. "It was nice to meet you, Gary Jones. Have a good evening." I turned and quietly walked out of the building. I spent the next hour loading up my 10-year-old truck. I was glad I had spent so much time preparing. I was trying to decide whether or not to take the George Foreman grill when my cell phone rang. "Curtis? Curtis, are you there? This is Marcia Hurd." "Yes, I'm here. How can I help you, Mrs. Hurd?" "You disappeared. I saw you and your wife arrive, but then you were gone. You missed an important part of the evening. I wanted you to be there." "I don't understand. What exactly did I miss?" "At 8 o'clock tonight, my husband Malcolm was served with divorce papers, and your wife was also served with a court summons. Since I own the company, they were both fired as well. I wanted to do it in a way that would maximize their humiliation. That's why I wanted you there, to embarrass your wife as much as possible." "Wow. Sorry I missed that. I admire your creativity." I didn't know what else to say, so there was a brief silence. "Are you going to be okay, Mrs. Hurd?" "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "Just trying to be a little tactful." "Well, thanks for the call. I need to get going. Best of luck with your business. Goodbye." I hung up before she could continue the conversation. I had a long drive ahead of me. The evening had gone much better than I had expected. I decided to bring the George Foreman grill with me. My brother Stan and his wife Barbara lived in Huntsville. Stan had his own business servicing garage doors and gates at private storage facilities. There were more than 100 storage units in the area, which meant thousands of doors constantly needed repair. He had more work than he could handle. Some larger facilities had their own maintenance staff, but for most, it was more cost-effective to outsource the work. I moved in with my brother and immediately started my new job. After working with him for 3 weeks, I began looking for work on my own. It was a welcome change of pace. I kept my old phone but removed the SIM card. Stan gave me a new phone for work. I also started searching for an apartment. Living in the guest room wouldn't work for too long. I didn't communicate with Sherry or anyone from home. No one knew where I was. I got an Alabama driver's license and registered my Subaru. Life was good. Everything was going great. I had a small apartment just a few minutes walk from Stan and Barbara. I set up a wood carving area in one of the bedrooms. I bought a small deep fryer to go along with the George Foreman grill. I didn't go on a keto diet, but I started watching my carb intake. Over 6 months, I lost 15 pounds. I didn't miss my old life, but it felt like I never got any closure. I expected someone to come looking for me, but that never happened. No one cared that I had left. Maybe they missed my money, but I was sure they never missed me. I was never served with divorce papers or any demands for support. I did have a few sleepless nights worrying about it, but I quickly got over it. Finally, one day, I decided it was time. "Hello, Curtis, is that you?" Her voice sounded normal. "Yes, I'm just calling to see if you filed for divorce." "Why do you ask? Are you thinking about getting married again?" "No, but I thought you might. I don't want to stand in your way." There was a brief pause. "Curtis, where are you? Don't you ever think about coming home?" "I hadn't planned on it. As far as I'm concerned, things are fine the way they are. What about you?" I'm afraid not so well. Fortunately, you called on a Sunday. I usually spend most of the day at work. Every morning, I work at Waffle House, and in the evening, I do shopping at Kroger. It's the only way I can afford to pay rent, utilities, and car insurance. Sorry to hear that. What happened with your company? I didn't get a response. I waited a few moments. Aren't the kids able to help you out? They're both old enough to get some kind of job. Dwight got caught selling drugs again, and he's serving 2 years at a juvenile center in Graterford. Gemma is in California with a guy named Rocco. I never did learn his last name, so they're not much help. Well, Sherry, I'm sorry things aren't working out for you. If you decide you want a divorce, just let me know. How am I supposed to do that? I don't have your address, and you keep your phone off. At that moment, I quietly pressed the hang up button. I blocked her number and turned off my phone. I would need to buy a new cell phone, maybe something smarter. The turning point in my new life came the following month. There was a craft show at the Von Braun Center in Huntsville. Stan and Barbara insisted that I go. One of Barbara's childhood friends was participating in the show and wanted to meet me. It sounded like some kind of setup, which I resisted, but I really wanted to see the show. Susie Doyle had displayed small figurines made from ceramics. Each one was about 15 to 20 centimeters tall and had a unique black finish. The figurines were unusual. They were animals, but unlike any I had ever seen. Some resembled penguins, but had heads like pelicans. I noticed a few small cat figurines with faces that looked like owls. They were, to say the least, unique. After the introduction, I had many questions. I probably should have been more interested in Susie herself, but I messed up by showing more interest in her artwork. Why are they all black? Do you burn them yourself? Are those real wood shavings or pellets? Why are some parts shiny and others dull? Susie apparently found my questions reasonable and took the time to answer each one as I asked them. Stan and Barbara were smiling, and Barbara seemed to be giggling slightly. They excused themselves and continued exploring the exhibition. I stayed behind and talked with Susie. I spent more time with her than I had with any other woman. We didn't discuss anything personal, but I asked if I could visit her at her home. She was very receptive. Half an hour later, Stan and Barbara returned. We stopped at Outback for dinner. Curtis, do you realize that ever since we left the convention center, all you've talked about is Susie and her animals? Barbara was kind of smiling as she said this. I paused for a moment. I guess so. I liked her. I also liked her quirky little animals. I felt comfortable with her. Stan leaned across the table and looked me in the eye. That's great, Curtis. Don't let this one slip away. I felt a bit embarrassed, and Stan and Barbara noticed. They both grinned when I told them I planned to visit her that weekend. Finding Boaz using GPS was easy. Finding Susie's actual place was a bit more challenging. It wasn't farmland or ranch land, just rural countryside. The house sat back from the road, about 100 meters or so. There were several outbuildings, more than one might expect. I wouldn't say it was neat, but it wasn't shabby either. You could say it looked lively. Additionally, it was very secluded. I was greeted with a hug and the barking of a dog, who quickly calmed down when it realized I wasn't a threat. The chickens, on the other hand, didn't seem to care one way or the other. We started the day with coffee and a relaxed conversation. She was eager to show me how she worked with ceramics. About 30 meters behind the house, there was a small hill, and on one side, you could see where she extracted the clay. There were several roughly made stands with wire mesh bottoms that she used to sift the clay before bringing it home. It quickly became clear how she managed to maintain her fit figure. Hauling a wheelbarrow full of clay back to the workshop over a bumpy road was no easy task. A few hours later, I was thoroughly impressed. The only thing I didn't understand was what the sawdust had to do with it. She said that would come after lunch. The sawdust was used for firing the ceramic figurines. She would load a 250-liter barrel with sawdust and green clay figurines, then set it alight. It took several days for the smoldering fire to reach the bottom of the barrel. By that time, all the figurines were fired. The finer the sawdust, the slower the fire would burn. We had a couple of sandwiches for lunch, then sat on the porch. She placed a cooler between two massive rocking chairs and smiled. I think she called Stan and Barbara before I arrived. The cooler was full of dark brown bottles. We didn't make it to the sawmill, but we certainly enjoyed a few cold ones. Susie made us pasta for dinner, and I spent the rest of the evening drinking coffee. No, I didn't stay the night. I really needed the GPS to find my way back home. I started spending a lot more time in Boaz, which seemed to make Stan and Barbara happy. Although I had no real interest in making ceramic figurines like Susie did, I was fascinated by the process and enjoyed learning how she did it. Of course, during this time, I didn't do much wood carving. I spent a few days improving the path from the clay pit to the workshop. I also managed to get a heavy-duty two-wheeled cart to replace the wheelbarrow, which I thought was a bit cumbersome. The primary way to control the firing speed in her sawdust kilns was by regulating the airflow. The type and texture of the available sawdust also affected the firing process. I managed to adapt an old lawnmower to shred the sawdust, which slowed down the burning process. Susie was thrilled with my efforts. One thing led to another, and eventually, I ended up spending the night in Boaz. Susie and I became much closer. By that time, we were discussing personal matters. I carefully explained my family situation to her, making an effort not to sound resentful. She wasn't too concerned that I was married. Her situation was a bit different. Susie had been married for 30 years. They had no children. Her husband, Dave, had just retired. Shortly after they moved, he suffered a heart attack. When it happened, he was in the back of their house. By the time she found him, he was beyond help. Their only income was his pension. If and when he died, the pension payments would stop. So, she made sure he never officially died. She showed me his resting place, and I'm sure I saw a small tear in her eye. Susie had kept his death a secret for over 3 years. The challenge was the federal income tax, but in the digital age, that was easily managed. The pension check came every month, and everyone was happy. One of the perks of living in Boaz is that nobody bothers you. During the week, I lived in Huntsville and continued working for Stan. On weekends, I was with Susie. She was as fascinated by my wood carving as I was by her ceramics. I had a small corner in her workshop for my carving. Unfortunately, I didn't have much time for it. The house she had shared with Dave needed serious repairs. Helping her in the workshop and tidying up the property left little time for carving. Dad called me from Ocala yesterday. Stan intercepted me before I started my rounds on Monday. Is everything okay? Is Mom all right? Yes, they're fine. He called to let me know they received a letter from a lawyer in Pennsylvania about your divorce. Sherry didn't know where to send it, so she asked them to forward it. I asked him to send it to me, and I'll make sure you get it. Damn. It's nice to get some good news for a change. What are you going to do? I think I'll just sign it and send it back. Maybe it would be a good idea to have someone look it over first. What do you think? We hired a lawyer for the business. I'll ask him to check it out. The divorce was pretty straightforward, so I just signed it and sent it back. She got everything that was there, and I kept everything I had with me. Now it was just a matter of waiting 90 days. Susie seemed pleased to hear about it, but she didn't make a big deal out of it. I felt a sense of relief. About 3 months later, I was living in Boaz full-time. I was still working for Stan, but I had to join the morning caravan heading to Huntsville. Like thousands of ants, the residents of the rural areas south of Huntsville migrated north every morning. To put it in perspective, thousands of similar ants were pouring down from the hills of Tennessee at the same time. Jobs and employment opportunities in Huntsville were booming, and people were willing to commute for the high wages. Cars traveled bumper to bumper northward in the mornings and returned every evening. Life was good. I was no longer married. Susie was active in the craft community and kept a schedule of all the craft shows and fairs in the area. At least once a month, she attended an event to sell her creations. With a bit of encouragement, she also started selling them online. The only problem was that shipping costs were so high that it limited sales. I often heard her quietly cursing Amazon. She just couldn't understand how they could ship things practically for free. I usually didn't go with Susie to the sales events. By that time, I had accumulated quite a large collection of wood carvings. I had given some to Stan and Barbara, but kept most of them for myself. I never thought they were good enough to sell. Susie asked if she could take a few pieces to her next show, and I agreed. When she returned from the latest show, I had dinner ready. How did it go? Not bad. I sold 28 pieces. I'll need to work to replenish the stock for the next show. She handed me a handful of cash. What's this? I counted over $500. I sold your fairy houses, and I've got orders for more. Wow. I didn't expect that. I was hoping you might sell a couple, but I never imagined you'd sell them all. It's great that I sold them. The downside is I sold them too cheaply. How do you know that? I found out that one of the guys who bought a couple had his own booth at the show. I sold them to him for $60, and he took them to his stand and resold them for $100. I felt like a fool. I didn't realize they were worth that much. I didn't know either. I'm not sure if I should be upset or flattered. Either way, don't worry. You did a great job. Next time, I'll ask for a proper price and bring more with me. That chili smells delicious. I'd better order more bark. The problem arose at the end of October. Susie was digging in the pit, and I was higher up the slope, trying to figure out how to get a dry cedar log back to the house. Cedar wood would be perfect for carving comfort birds. I heard him before I saw him. You're not easy to find, Mr. Langford. He sounded out of breath, as if climbing the hill had been a struggle. I was sure his extra weight and beer belly didn't help. What really caught my attention, though, was the large revolver in his right hand. What can I do for you? I racked my brain, trying to figure out who he was. He seemed familiar, but I couldn't place him. You've already done too much. It took me years to find you. You son of a bitch. I lost my job, my wife, and my life. All because of you. Suddenly, I remembered. This was Malcolm Hurd, my wife's former lover. I was puzzled by the fact that I had nothing to do with his downfall. I was just an uninvolved observer. His wife had orchestrated and carried out everything. I was trying to figure out how to explain that to him when I heard a loud thud and saw him drop the gun and slowly slump to the side. Susie was standing behind him, holding a shovel. She looked at me, tilted her head, and said, "Oops." We both sat down on an old poplar stump by the path. After waiting a few minutes, we both started to get worried. How hard did you hit him? He should have come around by now. Susie just looked at me and shrugged. It felt a bit awkward sitting there like that. A few minutes later, I stood up, leaned over, and put my hand on his neck. There was no pulse. I sat back down on the log. What the heck are we going to do now? Her tone held more curiosity than concern. I guess we could call the sheriff and claim it was self-defense, but that could turn into a mess. It took a bit more time to think things through. We could just bury him next to Dave and pretend nothing happened. I was surprised by how calm Susie was under the circumstances. I know this is a strange question, but did you keep Dave's wallet and personal belongings before you buried him? Yes. I still have his wallet, watch, and wedding ring at home. Why do you ask? Did any of the neighbors know Dave or spend much time with him? No, not at all. Dave kept to himself. We never visited anyone, and we didn't go to parties or anything like that. Did he look anything like Mr. Hurd? I mean, could he pass for Dave? Same age, weight, and build. Dave wore glasses. I have them at home, along with his other things. What are you thinking? I'm not sure if it will work, but I was thinking that if we could get a death certificate for this man, we might be able to pass him off as your husband and get you out of the pension fraud situation. Isn't that risky? What if someone recognizes him? We sat in silence for a few more moments. I'm going to go get Dave's things from the house. I'll be back soon. While Susie was gone, I took the opportunity to assess the situation. The terrain was a bit uneven and rocky. He had a few scrapes and a bit of blood on the back of his head. I carefully moved the body with a medium-sized rock and spread as much blood on the rock as I could. There wasn't much blood, but enough to suggest he had a head injury. It looked like an accidental fall. I took his wallet, watch, phone, car keys, and wedding ring. With Dave's glasses, he looked generic enough to be difficult to identify. DMV photos aren't usually very clear. Susie called 911. The paramedics confirmed that he was indeed dead. They called the local funeral home and the sheriff's office. Both arrived within 20 minutes, and 10 minutes later, Mr. Malcolm Hurd was on his way to cremation, while Susie Doyle received the death notice of her late husband. That evening, Susie followed me as I drove Malcolm's car to Birmingham. I left it unlocked near the Kit Kat Club, placing his wallet and phone on the front seat. 2 days later, the funeral home issued death certificates for David Doyle. After a brief trip to the TVA headquarters in Chattanooga, Susie was able to stop the pension payments and also collect a $100,000 insurance payout. That evening, we celebrated at a restaurant. I was amazed at how smoothly everything went. The paramedics acted efficiently and knew what they were doing. The sheriff's department representative was satisfied with their conclusion of death and didn't see the need to call in a coroner. The funeral home workers just wanted to take the body away as quickly as possible. No one even glanced at the driver's license. I stayed in the background the entire time and let Susie handle everything. She did a great job. Since Susie no longer had Dave's pension money, she needed to find another way to secure additional income. She decided that the easiest way to do that was to marry me. I couldn't refuse. After all, she still had that damn shovel. Thank you for listening until the end.